whether it's 52% or 62% or 72% or 82% of the people. They can't say, for example, that blacks and whites can't go to school together, even though 82% of the people may think that. They can't say that women aren't allowed to vote, or are not allowed to work in the workplace, or not allowed to equal rights or equal wages, even though a majority of people might vote that way in some places. There are certain rights that are so fundamental that the Constitution guarantees them to every citizen, regardless of what a temporary majority may or may not vote for. And remember, what Ted said is very important. Nobody's asking to create a new constitutional right here. This is a constitutional right that has already been well recognized by the Supreme Court. And what the Supreme Court has said is that even a democratic elected legislature in Wisconsin cannot decide by majority rule that marriage scofflaws, people who don't pay their child support, who abuse their children, abuse their wives, cannot get remarried again. They said marriage is so fundamental that you can't take it away, even for people who have abused an initial marriage. Missouri, the legislature, democratic elected legislature, voted majority rule overwhelmingly that imprisoned felons could not get married. Supreme Court says no. Even though they can't live together, they can't be together, marriage is such a fundamental human right that you can't take that away.
But what your opponents are saying now is that you're extending that fundamental right to same-sex partners, and there's nothing in the Constitution that refers to sexual orientation of any kind. That's the argument.
But what the Constitution says is that every citizen gets equal protection of the laws. It doesn't just say heterosexuals.
So this is the 14th Amendment
14th
you're
Amendment,
invoking in this case.
The 14th Amendment. And remember, the 14th Amendment was passed just after we got rid of slavery, which prohibited slaves from getting married. And one of the things that happened when slavery was abolished is large numbers of African Americans rushed to get married because they viewed this as one of the most important human relationships, and they viewed the recognition, the sanctioning of that relationship as critical to their ability to live together as a family. And the same thing is happening with gays and lesbians in our society today. We are saying to these people, you are somehow less than human. We're not going to give you all of humanity's rights. Because remember, if we recognize them as human, if we recognize them as full citizens, the Constitution guarantees that they have equal protection of the laws. They have the same rights as any heterosexual.
So you're both comfortable in validating 7 million votes in California?
Well, this happens when the voters decide to violate someone's constitutional rights. The original Constitution didn't have the Bill of Rights attached to it. And the framers of our Constitution had a big debate, and people said, well, we're not going to ratify that Constitution unless you attach a Bill of Rights, which protects individual liberty, individual freedom, the right to speak, the right to assemble, and those sorts of things. Over our history, the voters have decided, because they get passionate about certain things, and they may not like certain minorities. Minorities are disfavored. Blacks have been denied the right to vote. California prohibited a Chinese person from having any kind of business in California or getting married. Those kind of votes are not acceptable if they violate fundamental constitutional rights.
But you're going up not only against the voters of California, the majority of voters, you're going up against the Congress of the United States. In the 1990s, Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act, which actually defined marriage as, quote, a legal union between one man and one woman, and even declared that states need not recognize the marriages, the same-sex marriages of another state. And the president signed this. President Bill Clinton signed this. And you want to overturn not only the voters of California, but the Congress and the President of the United States.
But remember, that happens every time the Supreme Court declares a law unconstitutional. The Supreme Court, in a case that Ted argued, just declared certain restrictions on the ability of corporations to participate in political contests unconstitutional. They were overruling the democratic elected will of the Congress of the United States. That happens every single time the Supreme Court holds the law unconstitutional. And it was the power to hold laws unconstitutional that was given to an independent judiciary for the specific purpose of protecting minority rights against majority abuses.
The Congress and the President of the United States 50 years ago made it illegal for someone who is a gay or lesbian to have a job working for the federal government. Many states made it a crime for a homosexual to be in a bar and have a drink. We all remember the 50s when civil rights were taken away from people because they were suspected of being a member of an organization. Right. That those sorts of things happen, and we frequently go to the courts. And Bill, it often happens that the measures that are passed almost unanimously in Congress, because Congress gets carried away, are overturned by the Supreme Court, and you go back to members of Congress and you say, what happened there? And they'll say, well, we knew it was unconstitutional. We expected the courts to take care of that. We wanted to get reelected. The courts are the ones that come back and help us.
Well, I'm leading up to a point that seems crucial to me in the whole history of the Supreme Court, which is at what time does it take on public opinion? I mean, for example, roughly 40 states have laws banning gay marriage. In other words, you would be disenfranchising the voters of not just California and not just the Congress if you go this route. And isn't it risky to ask the court to invalidate that much public opinion before the public is really ready for it?
When the Supreme Court held that it was unconstitutional to prevent interracial marriages, 64% or more of the population of the United States, about 2/3 of the population of the United States, believed interracial marriages were wrong. That's a much higher percentage than opposes gay and lesbian marriage in this country today. Every time the Supreme Court overrules as unconstitutional act of Congress, they are overruling a decision that applies to every state in the Union. And they do it because the Constitution commands that that happens. When you're dealing with matters of human rights and civil rights, our Constitution and our history is that you don't deprive people of those rights simply based on majority rule. I would also say that if you look at where this country is going, if you look at the polls, the vast majority of people are moving in this direction already. Certainly all the young people.
Toward supporting same-sex marriage. But here's the thing.
Equality.
Equality, all right.
Equality for people.
But as you both know, some leading gay groups were opposed to what you have done. They argued that the country was not politically ready for this kind of judicial decision. And they said they need more time to win over the public opinion state by state. And if you go to the Supreme Court and lose, you will actually set back the cause of equality in marriage for years. So my question is, why did you go against the wishes of so many in the gay community who didn't want you to do this?
Well, and there are several answers to that. In the first place, someone was going to challenge Proposition 8 in California. Some lawyer representing two people was going to bring this challenge. We felt that if a challenge was going to be brought, it should be brought with a well-financed, capable effort by people who knew what they were doing in the courts. Secondly, when people said, maybe you should be waiting, maybe you should wait until there's more popular support, our answer to that was, well, when is that going to happen? How long do you want people to wait? How long do you want people to be deprived of their constitutional rights in California?
You've clearly read Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail.
I was going to say the very next thing. People told Martin Luther King, don't do it, the people aren't ready. And Martin Luther King responded, I can't wait. I'm not going to make people wait. And when people told Martin Luther King, you may lose, he said, the battles for civil rights are won ultimately by people fighting for civil rights. And one more thing, when the Supreme Court had made the decision in Loving versus Virginia in 1967, striking down the laws of 17 states that prohibited interracial marriage, now it's only, what, 40 years later? Yeah. 40 years later, we think that's inconceivable, that Virginia or some other state could prohibit interracial marriage. It's inconceivable. Public sometimes follows the opinions of the Supreme Court, reads the opinion and says, my gosh, thank goodness for the Supreme Court. We realize how wrong that was.
Did you notice that just the other day, the new governor of Virginia quietly signed an order removing the protection of gay workers, gay state workers? from discrimination. Did you see that?
I saw it, and I voted for that governor, and I think that was a wrong decision, and I suspect the court's going to strike it down, and someone's going to say, well, how can you strike down a measure enacted by the governor who was just elected by all the people? And the courts will say, well, we have to do it. That's why we are courts.
But in 1973, when the court ruled in favor of women's reproduction rights, the country, many people weren't ready for it. There was a huge backlash, and today women's reproductive rights are threatened because that political movement that grew up after Roe versus Wade has become so powerful. Women are now threatened in their choice.
Well, I don't think they're any more threatened now than they would have been if you hadn't had Roe against Wade. I mean, I think that what you can say is that you have to sometimes continue to fight these battles over and over again, but that's no reason not to fight them and try to win them when you can.